But as the great poet 50 Cent once said, right? You can't appreciate the sunny days without the rain.
Good afternoon, everyone. Join us today to learn a little more about the entrepreneurial spirit from someone who's an entrepreneur himself. Let me introduce to you a very special guest. This is Mr. Michael Kelly.
Hello, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yep.
Appreciate the invite.
And so, Mr. Michael Kelly, for those who may not know you as much, can you give a little bit of a gist about who you are and what your origin story is?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually a UT Dallas alumni, so it's good to be back here on campus.
Very interesting.
I had a really kind of weird journey and story. I originally went to UTSA, dropped out of college, built a career. I ended up working at JP Morgan for 12 years. Before that, I had a couple of companies. While I was at JP Morgan, I had multiple companies. And then I went back to school while I was working at JP Morgan. So I came to night school here at UT Dallas and on the weekends, and then graduated in 2020, spring of 2020, right when COVID hit. So that was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
And then I left JP Morgan in 2021 to start my current company, Resolute Future.
Wow. Very interesting. So you did mention that you were at JP Morgan multiple times. I noticed that you were actually able to become the vice president of investments, also working with around $120 million in funds, right? What inspired you to drop out from such a stable, I'm assuming well-paying job to go back into education and then go into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so, at the end of the day, as we go through life, there's certain things that become really interesting, really kind of drives our passions, right? And entrepreneurship is something that drives my passion, and more importantly, the need for entrepreneurship in the world. And so, I was doing really well at JP Morgan. I had a lot of wonderful clients, I had a lot of wonderful relationships, but I did feel like the impact that I was having there was not as large as I could have if I was doing something else. And so that's really kind of what drove the decision making for me. And took about 5 years actually from when I decided I wanted to leave to do something that I'm really passionate about. I kind of had an idea of what that was, but really wanted to formulate what those ideas looked like before I made that move, because it is hard and difficult to leave a job like that.
Yeah.
And finally culminated to me making that jump.
Nice. One more question. So you did mention how hard it is to make that switch. How do you find the right time to make that switch, or how do you know when it's a good idea to make that big jump?
Yeah, so this is actually, really a life thing more than a career thing, because in life we have a lot of really tough decisions to make, and it's never the right time, right? Like if you ask my wife, when would the right time be to have kids? The answer is always, next year, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes when I was at JP Morgan, I would do a lot of financial planning with people, and you hear, I plan on buying a house in the next 5 years. Well, and 3 years later, the answer is, in the next 5 years, right? And it's always difficult to make change in your life. And so there's never really going to be a perfect time. It's really about when is the best time you can do it, right, versus the worst time. And so you have to really look and understand all the components that go into the decision that you're making. So, for example, it's really difficult to get a mortgage if you're an entrepreneur. And so if I was planning on buying a house in the next year, then I shouldn't leave JP Morgan, right? I should stay there so I can get qualified for a mortgage and all of that fun stuff. So different things like that come into play when you're making a decision like that. But ultimately, at some point you just have to make the jump. At the end of the day, everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear, and so you can't hold yourself back from making those tough decisions.
So another question. So while you were at JP Morgan, you mentioned you started a few companies, right? How did that experience really help you grow as an entrepreneur now?
Yeah, so, a couple of different ways. It really shaped everything that I do, right? It really shaped the knowledge that I have, the experiences that I have, both at JP Morgan and when starting companies, right? So first thing is, whenever you're trying to go through life and figure out what you want to do and learn as much as you can, you want to get exposed to as many things as you can. But something that's really important that people don't tell you is, as soon as you realize something's not for you, you should set it down, right? So for example, I don't know if you like to read books.
I do.
Okay, so one of the best advice I could give somebody is read a lot of books, don't finish very many of them. Okay? And the reason for that is when you start digging into a book, the moment you're like, this is an okay book, people still finish it. Mm-hmm. That's a waste of your time. You're better off getting exposed to another idea that might capture your imagination, right? And so whenever you're reading books, you should really search for the ones that you can't wait until you read the next page, right? Mm-hmm. And now to take that metaphor outside of books, you should do the same thing in life, right? Mm-hmm. Get exposed to as many experiences as you can, especially if the experiences are a little scary for you, okay. And find things that you can't wait to get to the next page, right? And the more times that you can put yourself in that situation, the more you're going to learn, because then you're really going to have that intrinsic motivation to just dig in and understand those concepts. And then the more concepts you're exposed to, the more you're able to actually do and focus your attention on something that you're really passionate about. And so my time at JP Morgan really allowed me to do that, because not only did my job there require me to do a lot of different things, but starting multiple businesses were ways that I can itch my entrepreneurial spirit, but also get exposed to different things, because I started businesses in different realms. So yeah, it was really a lot of that. Now, my experience at JP Morgan, I was a fiduciary of other people's money. Okay. And so, being able to make tough decisions and own the outcomes of those decisions was really important. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing I learned from JP Morgan that really kind of carries forward and always will is the ability to make decisions in uncertain environments, right? Okay. So, the stock market, for example, it's always uncertain what direction it's going to go, but you still have to figure out how to make a decision and how to stand by that decision until it's time to pivot, right? And so it really helped me with that, and becoming really comfortable in operating in risk and understanding risk. There's a difference from, blinding yourself from risk and just doing things, and understanding the risk and doing it anyways. Mm-hmm. So I think those were some of the biggest lessons that I learned.
So kind of backing off what you said about risk, how do you understand risk? What's your tip to minimizing the amount of risk you take, or taking risk at a good way? Yeah. So really what it's all about is understanding, the concepts of, whatever it is that you're doing, or the environment that you're in, right? So if you're wanting to start a bakery business, okay, well, it's really important for you to understand what ingredients are you going to need. Okay. How do the costs of those ingredients change over time, right? It's important to understand, what the market for bakeries are like right now, especially in the area that you're wanting to open your bakery, right? And understanding the likes and dislikes of your customers. So, if you don't do all of those things, and let's say that you create this bakery and you have amazing, food and all of this stuff, maybe you open it in the right part of town, so you're getting a lot of customers, but you didn't account for how the pricing can change on the ingredients that you need. And then all of a sudden a war happens in Ukraine, and inflation starts shooting up, and all of the materials that you need to do your bakery business start getting more and more and more expensive. And you are blindsided by that, because you didn't even know that could happen, right? Versus somebody who understood, hey, the prices of these can vary, so that's something I need to pay attention to. If somebody's aware of that, as soon as the war happens in Ukraine, you might be more aware of, hey, a lot of the things that I need for this bakery actually come from Ukraine. What are the impacts that could have? Maybe I should go ahead and buy in bulk now before,
We start rationing some of these ingredients. Just understanding the different components of your business. The more you look into it, the more you can understand it, the more you can realize what risks actually are out there. Mm-hmm. And then that allows you to do two things. One, either plan ahead. Okay. Or simply just be more attuned to what can change. So when you see something in the news, you're more likely to say, oh, that could cause this, versus something happening in the news, causing it and going, oh, where did that come from?
Right. Okay. So I guess one of the big parts of entrepreneurship is being well aware of what's happening throughout the world at all times, right?
Yes. Right. Especially, depending on the type of company you're doing and the size company, right? Geopolitics can become a major role. Economic conditions can become a major role. Right, labor conditions can play a major role. Interest rates can play a major role. So needing to know what causes changes in interest rates. So that's what it really boils down to is, what does my business do? What is essential for my business to do what it does? And then I need to understand those core components that go into it.
Got it. Okay. So a few more questions. So. Now that you've, been at UT Dallas and have now created what's known as Resolute Future, can you give us a little bit of a gist about what Resolute Future actually does?
Absolutely. So the entrepreneurial journey is really complex, as you can tell through our conversation so far. And when you're trying to start a company from scratch internally, inside of your organization that you're creating, there's a lot that goes into it. Right. And, whether it's figuring out the people, whether it's figuring out the money, whether it's figuring out the technology, right, whether it's figuring out the risks, so like maybe cybersecurity or things of that sort. Right. Sometimes we're not experts in all those fields.
Right.
And even if you are an expert in a lot of those fields, it's a lot. Right. So it's hard to organize it all. And then at the same time, the entrepreneurial landscape is very fragmented. So actually going and finding the resources that you need, it's not clear cut. It's very difficult to find the ones that you need. It's not a simple Google search, right? And so that makes it to where to become a successful entrepreneur, you either have to have a tremendous amount of experience or a great network. Okay. And so that can be really limiting, right? And so ultimately we're trying to change that.
Okay. So when you said having a great network, right, how do you build that network and really build strong relationships while becoming an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. So it really boils down to two things, okay? Know what you can provide other people, which is why it's important to get exposed to a lot of different things and figure out what you're passionate about. And then have a very specific ask of somebody who's willing to help.
Okay.
Right? The fortunate thing is when you talk to a lot of people who've been successful, a lot of them actually are very willing to help other people. Okay? It took other people to help them get there, and so they like to pass it on. But when you don't have a specific ask, you make it really hard for them to help you. Right? So like when you asked me to come here, right, and do this interview, you had a very specific ask. Okay? It's easy to say yes when you do that.
Right.
But if your ask is very ambiguous, they don't even know what they're saying yes to help you do.
That's true.
So they don't have a whole lot of time, so they're not going to say yes to some ambiguous questions. So be very specific on what your ask is.
Okay.
Be very specific on how you can provide value to somebody else. And that really ultimately is what it boils down to when it comes to networking. The X factor, I would say, which again goes back to trying a lot of different things, you become a more interesting person. Right? You have a lot of different things you can talk about, experiences you can talk about. And so the more interesting person you can be, the more interested somebody else is going to be in getting to know you.
Got you. So kind of backing on to a question I asked earlier, actually, how do you go out there and really gather all of these experiences?
Be interested in a lot of things, and just seek out exposure.
Okay.
Right? I think a lot of times, especially nowadays, part of the thing that holds a lot of us back is we're afraid to fail. And so that fear of failure, we just don't even do things sometimes. And I would actually say it's essential to fail. It's actually essential to learn how to fail. It's essential to learn how to win, right? And so embracing the potential failure is actually something that's really important.
Okay.
And the moment that somebody switches their frame of reference on that, opportunity actually opens up.
Okay.
You know, if you're afraid to fail, then you immediately close off anything that you're willing to try to a much smaller subset of things to expose yourself to. And then that can become really limiting. And so I think that's really the major switch that people have to make is it's okay if I fail. I'm just going to try a bunch of things. Okay.
Got it.
And what's interesting is when you fail and you still become really interested in something, that is where growth really happens, because then you can dig in and learn, and then that's now something that you might not fail at next time, right? And so that's where growth happens. And so that's how you get exposed to a lot of things.
So kind of backing off, if you're trying to seek failure, I guess, in a way, right? What do you do if you're not able to get as much failure as you want in terms of growth?
Yeah, so, I'm somebody who I'm just naturally pretty good at things, right? So I'm naturally athletic. When I read something one time, I'm very quick to get it and understand it, right? And so, you just continue to expand your palette, right? So, for example, sports. I was really good at basketball, baseball, and football. I played all of them, right? My wife played golf in college. And so in 2020, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to play golf. And I was terrible. Absolutely horrible, right? But I came into it with the expectation of I'm trying something new. And so I can't expect to be good, right? But I still had fun. And very quickly, I think because of my natural athletic ability, I got to the point where people were saying, "You've only been playing how long?
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't be able to do what you just did." You know, I'm still not great, right? But at the end of the day, constantly expanding and seeking these different things is the only way. And if you're somewhat good at things, then keep going, right?
Okay.
And dig deeper into concepts, right? So let's just say I picked up the golf club and I was immediately pretty decent. All right, well, I need to play other people who are a lot better than me. And I'm going to fail, and I'm going to see how they did something better than I am, and then I'm going to learn. Right?
Yeah.
And so you can even get deeper into subjects until you fail, as long as it's something that is interesting to you.
Okay, very interesting. One more question. So, like you mentioned, a lot of things in the startup realm have to do with failure. So I'm sure you've experienced a lot of failure itself. How do you manage that failure to the point where it helps you grow rather than demotivating you?
That's a really good question. So I played poker really successfully for a decent chunk of my life. And the art of poker is to learn how to limit your losses. Okay? So, if you're sitting at a poker table, everything has a probability of happening, right? Even if you get dealt, the best possible hand you can be dealt, pocket aces, and you're going against the worst possible hand, 7-2 offsuit, there's still a probability you're going to lose that hand. Right? And so the key is to understand how to move probability in your favor. Okay, so maybe I'm going to bet really high to where it's too expensive for that person to take that big risk, and so they fold, right? And even then, there's still a probability that they might call and you lose, right? And so at the end of the day, it's all about understanding how to put the odds in your favor as much as possible and recognize when the odds are turning so that you can limit what your losses are. And that's why learning to fail young is really important, because as you get older, as you get more responsibilities, the stakes are higher, right?
Right.
So, for example, I now have a 14-month-old. The stakes are higher if I fail, right? And so having experience failing now makes it to where I can recognize different things to watch for, to say, oh, I've got to be careful with that. I got to be careful here. Oh, this is not working. How do I cut my losses and limit my losses as much as possible, both for myself and for my investors, right? It's really important.
Okay. So kind of going back to the poker analogy, right? When you're playing poker, it's all based on luck to an extent, is it not?
No.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Poker is not based on luck, right? There's a perceived luck because of the probability nature, okay? And this goes back to understanding how to operate in uncertainty, right? Life is uncertain,
right?
So at the end of the day, it's all about understanding the person that you're sitting across from, okay? The decisions that they have made since they sat down at that table, okay? You can recognize, is this person, really aggressive, or are they really tight, right? And how they bet. So when they bet, do they bet really large sums of money? Do they do small bets? Okay, when are they betting and when are they not betting? Okay, are they loose and tight with the cards that they play? So do they only play really, really good cards, or do they play good and bad cards? And having that information allows you to understand, how I make decisions when I'm in a hand against that person, right? And so if there's somebody, for example, who only plays really good cards and they're really aggressive, when they are betting really high, it's likely that they have a really good hand. Yeah. So I need to make decisions understanding they have a really good hand. Okay? So what that might mean is I need to be quick to fold, or, hey, I actually have, a 40% chance of getting an amazing hand here. I'm willing to take this and call this big bet because I know they have a good hand. And if this 40% chance hit, I'm going to take a lot of money from them. Right? So using their decision making and operating in uncertainty, right, are skills that we've talked about that are really important. Poker actually is the perfect personification of those assets. So that's why it's actually considered a skill game and not a luck game.
Very interesting. Would you recommend everyone to learn a little bit more about poker and test it out?
So that's a tough one because, there are people who it can be used as gambling. Right? And so if you have a gambling nature to you, I do not recommend checking out poker, okay? Because there are people who go in and just say, hey, I'm willing to, I get a high off of risk, and so I take unnecessary risks, and you're going to lose a lot of money if you do that playing poker, right? And so I always caution people, right? But if you don't have kind of a gambling nature, there are ways to play poker for free, okay? Especially if you do it in the spirit of learning. I think it is an incredible skill. But there are risks. You have to know yourself well enough to know whether or not you should go down that endeavor.
Wow. So you really used poker to really understand human nature, I guess, and how to understand what people are thinking. Exactly. Very smart. Another question. So I noticed you were also a co-creator for what's known as the X Club, right? So how exactly does that initiative work, and how does that help unify the Dallas entrepreneurial ecosystem, founders and stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. So in a lot of ways, Dallas operates in silos in the Dallas business community. And everyone kind of has their own goals of what they want to accomplish. And they think about their decision making through the goals that they want to accomplish. Okay. And when everyone is operating separately in their own goals, it actually limits growth. It actually limits your ability to I like to say grow the pie of entrepreneurship instead of focusing just on your piece. And so the goal of the X Club is simply to unify, right, the goals and the decision making of different organizations across Dallas. And kind of be that neutral brand that says, hey, our only goal is actually to grow the pie of entrepreneurship in Dallas. And if we grow the pie, then your piece of the pie also grows. Right. And so that's really why it was created. The other reason why it was created is oftentimes a lot of networking events tend to look and feel the same. So they, you go, you grab a drink, you sit down, and then you just randomly talk to people until you leave. And so we wanted to do something that's a little bit different than that, and have some fun with it. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of our events, we do some just interesting things to get people to have experiences together as opposed to having, a conversation about the weather.
Got you. Kind of going back into it. So what activities does X Club actually host or do?
Yeah, so we're actually making some changes right now as we speak. Mm-hmm. But initially what we've done is we've kind of done large quarterly mixers, okay. Where we have hundreds of people come together at the same time. The plan was kind of working towards where we'll do small curated on a monthly basis. So for example, we have intake forms where we have founders of companies, we have investors, and we have people who service companies, answer questionnaires where they tell us who they are, what they do, what they can provide. And then we will bring together, 7 to 10 people who have the same problem. Mm-hmm. And we'll bring some people in that can help them solve that problem. And we'll do it over dinner or something like that. So a little bit more intimate and purposeful in those events. And then right now, we are actually putting together something where we're calling e-talks, okay. Which think of it as TED Talks, but specific to entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to call those more intimate events e-chats. Right, and so we're going to start building content online, okay. So that entrepreneurs can actually learn some of these concepts that are really important.
Very interesting. Another question. So about the X Club, how can people get involved with the X Club?
Yeah, so if you go to www.thexclub.co, that is the website, and so we have the forms on there where you can click on it and answer the questions, mm-hmm. and then that puts you into our database. So that's one. 2, on LinkedIn, you can look us up on there and follow it. But yeah, that would be the best way.
Okay, so for all the Dallas entrepreneurs or founders, this is your perfect way to gain a network and really meet other people in this space.
Absolutely.
So I know that X Club kind of, like you mentioned, works with entrepreneurs and bringing the entrepreneurial ecosystem together, right? Mm-hmm. How is that similar related to Resolute Future?
Yeah, so Resolute Future, the goal is to increase entrepreneurship mm-hmm. in the world, right? And so the only way to do that is if you start unifying some of the pieces. So as I mentioned before, the entrepreneurial landscape is fragmented. It's very difficult to navigate. Mm-hmm. And so, our software company is doing one way to help defragment the ecosystem, and the X Club is working from a different angle, okay. Because you need your internal resources and your external resources aligned and organized in order for you to be successful, and right. So we're kind of tackling it from 2 different perspectives.
Got it. One more question. So what makes Resolute Future and its combination with X Club different than what something like an accelerator or like Y Combinator would do?
Great question. So Y Combinator, as an example, is something that you have to apply to get into, mm-hmm. okay? And they only take a very small subset of people.
Right.
Okay? So everything that they do is proprietary. Everything that they do, they control. Everything that they do is designed to help that small subset of people, right? Mm-hmm. Our goal is to grow the pie of entrepreneurship. Right? Okay. And so we don't have that layer of filtering. We prefer to use filtering to make better connections as opposed to whether or not we allow somebody in. So they're a closed ecosystem. We are an open ecosystem.
Got it. How do you all allocate resources? Because you are saying you want to expand it to a large amount of people, right? Mm-hmm. How do you all spread upon the resources to such a large amount of people?
So we index all the resources that are available, mm-hmm. okay? And then we just help directionalize who needs who. Okay. Okay. And so, for example, if we learn that you provide some service, right, but you do a really good job to, people with certain characteristics, right? Well, then we're going to help directionalize people with those characteristics to you, right?
Okay.
And so, there is no organization in the market for something like that.
Okay.
Because every service provider says that they do a great job for everyone because they just want to sell more.
Right.
Okay? And every entrepreneur, for example, is just looking for help. So they try a bunch of services and it causes them to waste a lot of time and waste a lot of money. And I don't know if you know this or not, but there's two things that founders have little to none of, and it's time and money. And so wasting those is not very helpful, right? And so just simply organizing everything in a way that allows for better connections, more efficient connections, will help founders save time and money, and then they can spend that time and money on their business. We think will have a positive impact.
Okay. So you talk a lot about helping the entrepreneurs and stuff like that, and I'm assuming you've worked with and speak to a lot, right?
Yeah.
So what's your biggest tip for all the people that are starting their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so there's two things that I think are really important, and we've kind of talked about them a little bit throughout. So one, alignment is purpose, okay? You have to align everything in your life, and if everything in your life is aligned towards a goal, then the only direction you can go is forward, okay? So that includes, who you hang out with. That includes, making sure your family is on board with what you're doing, right? Making sure that the decisions that you make, right, your co-conspirators are in line with what you're doing, is really important. And so alignment is one of the most important factors. And then, the next one is going to be maybe difficult for a lot of people to hear, but we live in a world of extremes, right? Black and white, right? You're right or you're wrong, right? If you don't believe what I believe, then you're wrong, right? It's hard for everyone to be right. So in a world where we're operating like that, okay, nuance is the arbitrage of decision making. Okay. And the more comfortable with nuance you can be, the better leader you can be.
Okay.
And in order to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to grow into becoming a great leader. And so the more nuanced you can be, especially in places where you have a lot of passion for, then the better off that you will be. And just to build a bridge off of that, you can't lead anyone if everyone agrees with you.
Right.
Okay, so you have to have the courage to step out because, there is no leader where everyone sits there and agrees.
Yeah.
A leader moves people, right? A leader leads them into a place that they haven't been before. And it takes nuance to be able to do that.
Okay. So kind of backing that, what makes a really good CEO? So as you've seen and spoke to a few, what's a trait that you've noticed in a lot of really successful CEOs or founders?
Being both nuanced and precise, okay? Right? So they know exactly what they want, okay? So you look at somebody like Elon Musk, for example, right? So this person is obviously brilliant, okay? He knows what his goals are and he goes after those goals, okay? And then if you look at a lot of the things he talks about, okay, whether people agree with him or not, right? A lot of times he will say things where one side of the political aisle loves him and another side of the political aisle hates him, okay? Then he'll say something else and it's switched, right? This side now likes him because of this thing he said and this side hates him because of this thing he said. He's very nuanced. He doesn't look at things of, I identify as this, and so now this is the checklist of the things I'm supposed to believe, right? Life doesn't operate that way. Life doesn't look like that, right? And so to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to have the ability to look at every single thing as its own separate thing and identify the positives and negatives of it, and then be very precise on how you move forward from there.
Okay, very interesting. One more thing. So are there any specific last tips you have for all the entrepreneurs out there in the Dallas area?
Have fun.
Have fun.
The life of an entrepreneur is a very lonely road, right? You are the person that has this belief, has this future you're trying to create, and nobody else can truly understand it until they see it. Right? And so have fun, right? It's really important that you take the time to appreciate the hard times. As it's kind of a joke, but as the great poet 50 Cent once said, right? You can't appreciate the sunny days without the rain, and so the moment you can even appreciate the rainy days because you know that the sunny day is coming, that is when you can truly live a better and more purposeful life.
Wow. Okay, so like I said, listen to 50 Cent. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's really great listening to you, and I'm sure everyone out there is also excited to listen to your advice. Do you have... Oh, sorry. One last question. What do you think is the secret sauce to being a good entrepreneur?
The secret sauce is just, have conviction in what you're doing and have conviction in the problem that you're solving, not how you're solving the problem. Okay. The way that you solve the problem shouldn't matter. Okay. And a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck on how they're solving the problem, and they forget about the problem that they're trying to solve to begin with. And that leads to a lot of failure. So just be obsessed with the problem that you're trying to solve. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kelly, and thank you for having me. Join us for our next video. Thank you.